we don't all understand that impeachment should work this way. I have written many times now, including this column, this week, that and I went on a rant about this last week on the Dispatch podcast. There's an infuriating tendency during these impeachment trials. We've now had 3.25 centuries where lawyers flood the zone, at the behest of television bookers. So there's a lot of blame to go around. Lawyers flood the zone and fill the airways with legalistic verbiage, precedent this and, mens rea that. And, Dershowitz gets out there and says, you can't impeach if you don't meet this standard. And my friends of mine like Andy and Sarah and David, they'll say, you can impeach if you meet this standard and blah, 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 blah. And every now and then Jonathan Turley or whoever will have this little sort of, of course, this is a political process and not a legal process, but, it's presided over by, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and it's supposed to be a trial nonetheless, and these are the standards, and this is the precedent, Warren Hastings, and blah, 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 blah. And they leave this impression that legalistic standards are the only standards that matter. And it's amazing when you go and you read, and there are hundreds and hundreds of these op-eds of and about and around impeachment from all these TV lawyers and other lawyers, who are not necessarily all bad people, but they just get so high on their own legal farts on all this stuff, and they get into these weeds about this precedent and this standard and what the Constitution implies with this and blah, 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 blah. And they leave the impression that it would be some incredible miscarriage of justice to impeach and remove a president for something that falls short of a clear-cut crime. And, and look, again, blame is all over the place. The founding fathers deserve a lot of blame here, too, because, I think they couldn't have foreseen it, but the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors is such a weird phrase. And maybe it wasn't when they were writing the damn thing, but, originally the founding fathers wanted it to be that impeachable offense would include things like maladministration. And maladministration sort of gives a better sense of things, right? It's not the best word in the world either, but high crimes makes it sound like high crimes, right? But then what the hell is misdemeanors doing in there? So it's treason or parking tickets. But regardless, you get this environment that makes it sound like it is the gravest thing in the world to remove a president from office, if they haven't done something that is just overtly and clearly criminal. And I think that is just not what the founding fathers intended. It's not how impeachment should work. It's not what the actual Constitution says. And yet we get this environment that is so unbelievably dysfunctional, and then it feeds into all of these other garbage arguments about how impeachments overturn the will of the voters. And in no way, shape, or form does impeachment and removal overturn the will of voters. Even a miscarriage, even a bad impeachment and removal would not overturn the will of the voters. You know why? Because in this country, for reasons that aren't about the internal wisdom of the founding fathers, but more have to do with the fact that their first stab at this messed stuff up, we elect vice presidents and presidents on the same frickin' ticket. So if you impeached and removed Bill Clinton, you wouldn't have made Bob Dole or George H.W. Bush president. You would have made Al Gore president, and he probably would have gotten reelected if he gotten made president. If you impeached and removed Donald Trump, you wouldn't have made Hillary Clinton president. You would have made Mike Pence president. And Mike Pence, vice presidents get just as many votes in our system as presidents do. Moreover, the thing that really bothers me about this overturning the will of the people nonsense is that there's not a single voter in America who voted for Trump to try to bully the Ukrainian government to indict Joe Biden or whatever the hell that was, right? Not a single one. There wasn't a single American who voted for Donald Trump in either election to encourage mobs to swarm the Capitol and then storm the Capitol. It was just not anything that people voted for, because there's this thing about the space-time continuum that says you can't willfully vote for behavior that is really unpredictable and is in the future. And it was sort of a self-slander from all of the Trumpistas who would say, oh, well, you can't overturn the will of the American people because they voted for Donald Trump. Well, they didn't vote for Donald Trump to do whatever the hell he wanted. They voted for Donald Trump to be president, and presidents are constrained. There are checks on presidential power, and one of them is impeachment. But we don't think of impeachment that way. We have put impeachment on such a pedestal that is basically, we can't bring the little hammer to it and break glass in case of emergency anymore. And I honestly think a no confidence vote kind of thing would be better. If we're going to have an imperial presidency, if we're going to give it insane powers that were never intended, that are not in the Constitution, if all these executive orders are going to continue the way they are, it should be easier to remove presidents from office. But that's not the world we live in. And so anyway, the real point I want to get to about all of this is that, and it's kind of an atmospheric complaint, right? It is a complaint about the general thrust of certain kinds of arguments, rather than, I don't want to get in the weeds of every specific argument. But there is this approach to criticizing the Smith indictments, or the latest indictments. And I'm totally on board. I think the Bragg indictment was terrible. It had very bad unintended consequences. Starting this era of indicting presidents with the weakest and flimsiest and dumbest of the indictments was bad, because it kind of inoculated the Republican electorate to think, okay, these are all BS. It should have been, the first time you do it should be for really strong reasons, which is why I think the Mar-a-Lago one was the best one. But anyway, there is this tendency to say, well, if we do, I was listening to Charlie Cook, and everyone knows I love Charlie. There are these dangers that if we do this, it is possible that we will so expand the notion of fraud that it'll become a tool for the weaponization of politics and yada, 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 something like that. And you may be right. That may be true. And you read, other people about this stuff who are less exacting and less careful and less literate. And it's all about how going after Trump will have all sorts of moral hazards. Will have all sorts of unintended consequences. Will set all sorts of bad precedents for the future. And again, I am not dismissing all of those arguments. It is entirely possible. It is plausible. It is probable that is true in one circumstance or another. Fine. But the problem I have with those arguments is they tend to discount or wholly ignore the moral hazard, the bad precedent, the unintended consequences that will come from not doing anything at all about Trump. Right? Sending the signal into the future that you can try to steal an election through fraud. I mean, if you follow this stuff going on with the Michigan electors, right? The entire Trump stop the steal thing may not meet all the definitions of fraud, but there are lots of subordinate parts that just simply meet the definition of fraud in the most obvious way. These Michigan electors had forged documents. They lied about, their legitimacy. They lied about, the process by which they got these, it's fraud, right? It's just straight up fraud. Or I'm sorry, since we have these Jesuitical arguments about the meaning of fraud in terms of criminal conduct, absolutely fraudulent, right? If we send the signal that the president of the United States can encourage, I'm not saying incite, but can encourage and certainly condone, right? He wants to give out pardons. He says the January 6th people are great people who've been railroaded. He celebrates, some of the worst people in that whole mob. If we send the signal into the future that a president can do all of the things that Donald Trump clearly and obviously did, that even critics of Jack Smith concede are incredibly damning as they come out as laid out in the indictment, and say there are really no consequences or sufficiently small consequences that you can run again for president and be the front runner for the nomination just 4 years later, that is not a good precedent to lay down for the future, right?